Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all our invited guests, the speakers, and the participants to this Regional Directors Conclave 2021, being organized by the Institute of Directors, Bangalore region. This is the second webinar being organized by Bangalore region during the COVID-19 pandemic. In these trying times, webinar is the best way to keep in touch with our members. The theme of the conclave is the roles and challenges of the Audit Committee in corporate governance. Strong corporate governance is a basic requirement for any organization in today's world. The Audit Committee is unarguably the most important committee of the board in ensuring good corporate governance. The primary purpose of the company's audit committee is to provide oversight of the financial reporting process, the audit process, the company system of internal controls, and with laws and regulations. In recent times, in view of the changing scenario, the focus of the audit committee has shifted to on financial reporting, the oversight of the company's risk management and policies, oversight and evaluation of the performance and effectiveness of the audit process, interaction with the statutory auditors and the internal auditors, the oversight and evaluation of internal financial controls, related party mechanisms, visual and whistleblower mechanism, and the monitoring of end use of funds through public offers. And the agenda of the committee should also include plans to leverage the impact of technology, the company's plans to leverage robotics, cloud technologies, artificial intelligence, and data analytics so that the audit process can be improved and more efficient, along with the finance function. The other areas requiring the attention of the audit committee include cyber security, data privacy, business continuity, corporate culture, and etc. The natural implication of the new set of responsibilities is that investors and stakeholders will place more reliance on the judgments of the audit committee to oversee these areas in an appropriate manner. Any organization implements strategies to reach its goals. Each strategy has got certain risks associated with the strategy, and that these must be managed to meet these goals. Following strong corporate governance principles that focus on the management, on risk management, beg your pardon, and overseen by the audit committee allows organizations to reach their goals in an effective manner. Today's webinar will highlight the structure and the role of the audit committee in line with its responsibilities pertaining to these corporate policies and compliance measures. This webinar will also discuss the best practices for evaluating the performance of audit committee in risk and fraud related issues. Communication is the key to good governance and includes ensuring that the financial statements which are presented to the shareholders are both understandable and reliable, and facilitates internal communication with senior management and internal audit team. We expect that this webinar will facilitate an exchange of ideas by bringing to some of the key board leaders, professionals, and the policy makers. Today's webinar will have a keynote address delivered by Mr. M.D. Ranganath, the Managing Director of Catamaran Ventures. He is also an independent director in HDFC and a former CFO of Infosys. Mr. Ranganath has got a bachelor's degree in engineering from Mysore University, a master's degree in technology from IIT Madras, and postgraduate diploma in management from IIM Ahmedabad. He is the recipient of Best CFO Asia Award in technology sector by Institutional Investor Publication for 2 years, 2017 and 2018. Following the address by Mr. Ranganath, we'll have a special address by Ms. Rachel Johnson, who's joining us from UK. She is the head risk management and corporate governance at ACCA UK. Ms. Johnson graduated from USA Indiana University with a BA in journalism and communications. She has an authentic history of creating thought leadership content on a range of financial topics, including global capital markets, corporate governance, risk management, responsible investing, sustainable finance, and regulation. Following the address by Ms. Rachel Johnson, we'll have a panel discussion chaired by Mr. Arun Balakrishnan, the former CMD of HPCL, the founder chairman of HPCL Mittal Energy Limited, and chairman of IOD Bangalore region. In this panel, we have got 4 experienced speakers. Mr. Manoj Kumar Vijay is a partner at BSR Associates and Company LLP. Mr. Jyoti Mehta, chairman of the Audit Committee of Linde India Limited and independent director in multiple companies. Mrs. Revati Ashok, co-founder Strategic Garage, former managing director at Trishman Spear and independent director in multiple companies. And Partha Bhattacharya, former chairman of Coal India Limited and former managing director of Haldia Petrochemicals and independent director multiple companies. And after the conclusion of the panel discussion, there will be a question and answer session for about 50 minutes. All the participants are requested to send the questions through the chat box on the Zoom platform. We hope to have an exciting question and answer session with your cooperation, all the participants. This webinar has been sponsored by Mahindra Finance, Gale Gas Limited, and Haldia Petrochemicals Limited. We thank the sponsors for their financial support and for making this program possible. I now welcome Mr. Ranganath for delivering his keynote address. Mr. Ranganath, you have got 25 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rajan. Good afternoon, everybody. Can I request for the presentation to be kind of uploaded, please? Yeah. So as it is getting uploaded, I would like to thank Institute of Directors, Mr. Balakrishnan, and all the other members for providing me this opportunity to share certain perspectives. I would like to see this less like an address, but more like some kind of a knowledge sharing, where I would love to kind of hear your feedback, your inputs. I know that each one of you have been on the boards, both on audit committee as well as the non-audit committees. There is immense and rich experience in this forum. It would be great to kind of obtain your perspectives on the role of the audit committee. As Mr. Rajan mentioned in the beginning, clearly, last couple of years, there has been a very, very sharp focus on audit committee, especially in India. The reasons are obvious, whether it is real estate kind of events that happen or the bank events, NBFC events, that has brought to focus not just among the regulators, but also the shareholders, the creditors to the companies, as well as general public, a fair amount of scrutiny of how audit committees conduct themselves and what is the expectations of those audit committee, responsibilities of audit committees. Now, of course, each company's context is different, promoter-led, non-promoter-led, highly regulated industries such as banks or global companies like IT services companies. I think the context of each company is different. However, a common theme is clearly emerging, as Mr. Rajan pointed out earlier, is that increasingly the expectation of audit of becoming more and more multidimensional. So next slide, please. So what I would kind of share today is, clearly how some of the boards and the audit committees are clearly addressing this increased expectation. And what are some of the mechanisms that that seem to have worked. Of course, some of them are in very early trajectory, but nevertheless, each board and different boards are kind of looking at this in a very, very different perspective. Now, I had the privilege and I was lucky to kind of played on both sides of the equation as part of the management team, as CFO, working with a very exemplary audit committee in a globally listed company. And the other side, as audit committee chair, working with a very exemplary management. I think from both, there are immense learnings, immense perspectives. I would like to share some of them and hear your comments and feedback on the same. Now, as earlier, Mr. Rajan also emphasized, clearly there were very well-defined roles for audit committee. Primarily, if you look at this slide, the first line pretty much covered for a long time, whether it is financial statements, controls, disclosures, etc. But the discussion table of audit committee kept expanding with every new event that happened in the economy or in another company. The new pieces came onto the table of audit committee. For example, this pandemic thing is a classic case. Well, yes, one can easily say that yes, the COVID thing is a broad management and board topic. Yes, it is a concern as a risk. But more importantly, it has also kind of been coming directly into the plate of audit committee. Exchange Commission of the United States has made certain disclosures compulsory, especially for globally listed companies, very detailed disclosures relating to COVID, both financial risk related, audit efficiency related, audit preparedness related, and so on and so forth, internal concern related, relating to pandemic. Now, how it has kind of impeded certain controls, changed certain controls, reduced the audit effectiveness, incomplete audit plan execution, and so on and so forth. Similarly, ESG, right? ESG is classical board matter, but there are extensive reporting requirements on ESG, which again comes to the basket of audit committee. And likewise, capital allocation, likewise, process effectiveness, and cybersecurity, of course, that's very popular today. So again, in cybersecurity, there are extensive disclosures mandated by several regulators. So all this is kind of resulting in certain, certain situations, which I'll talk in the next slide. Next slide, please. So it has clearly resulted in, while all of us clearly agree, that's a very crowded agenda for the audit committee. Well, I think, especially in a heavily regulated industries like financial services, it becomes more and more crowded. Audit committees find it extremely difficult to kind of just stick to, 1 quarter meeting or 2 times in a quarter kind of meetings. Apart from the financials results, there is a very, very crowded agenda. So how to address that? How to make sure that all the expectations of the audit committee are kind of are managed even with the crowded agenda? The need for diversified expertise. Well, yes, financial expertise is core and that is essential. That will continue to be the mainstay of the audit committee members. But increasingly, it has become clear that, look, at least one or two members of the audit committee have to bring in additional perspectives, whether it is technology related, whether it is forensic skills related, or whether it is, broader general managerial pieces which are required, earlier slide, or cybersecurity related. Now, that has become need for a much more diversified expertise, just like we look for diversified board coming from multiple functions. It has become important that audit committee cannot just have financial experts, it needs to have, in addition, a couple of broad-based experts on audit committee. I think some of the companies have already tried to address that. Now, it has also brought in, even for the financial experts on the committee, continuous learning. For example, both the pandemic as well as the cybersecurity piece, or even ESG, it requires enormous additional knowledge and expertise that not just at the high level, but it requires fair amount of detailing. For example, in case of banks, RBI, I'm sure many of you know, has made it compulsory for cybersecurity certification for audit committee and board members of a bank. It's compulsory certification conducted over 2 days, in one of the places in Hyderabad. Now, how do we kind of ensure that? Of course, even in the auditing standards, disclosures, there are a whole lot of stuff that audit committee needs to continuously keep itself updating. Now, this increased increased expectation has also increased the auditor engagement intensity with the audit committee. It's not just quarter end, auditors come, make a presentation relating to the financials. I think throughout the quarter, some level, at least with the chairman of the audit committee, most of the times, some amount of engagement is required, and how some of the companies are handling that. And external consultants, they have become integral, because wherever audit committee has to augment its own expertise and something has to be gone in more detail beyond even financials. For example, in cybersecurity, one of the key things is how to ensure the internal controls are not diluted because of cybersecurity. And how do we kind of do penetration testing of financial systems, the critical control systems within the corporation. So external consultants are playing increasingly a larger role. Same in ESG, same in case of some of the M&A pieces, sometimes even in forensics. Then this has also resulted management engagement intensity. It's not just with the CFO, but also with other members of the management, some of the business leaders, CEO, of course, and with the compliance person head, not just internal audit. So that kind of cadence of those intensity, some of the boards have begun to discover new methods of engaging them. And last but not the least, the board itself is increasingly having higher expectations from audit committee, because I think the board engagement with some of the critical matters relating to audit committee in much more way. For example, it is just not enough, some kind of a brief update to the committee by audit committee chairman during the course of the board meeting. That may not be sufficient anymore, especially on certain matters where non-audit committee members of the board have increased expectation on how they get updated, how they get apprised from the audit committee on critical matters. I think these are all some of the resultant aspects given the increased agenda and plate filling on the audit committee's role. Next slide, please. Now, what I'm going to share is for each of at least some of those items, at least from my experience, how a couple of boards have tried to address this. And each one has their own, there is no right or wrong method, but some of these things have kind of seem to be more effective in kind of meeting those increased expectations. Now, one of the most common things I see is that audit committee meetings are becoming more frequent. I would say, at least in regulated industries like banking, for example, and even in some of the global IT services companies, it is almost a monthly. Certainly one mid-quarter, apart from the financial results, one mid-quarter audit committee, special audit committee meeting, and sometimes even monthly has become a reality. The reason is simple. The quarter-end meetings are so focused on the numbers, and there is also time pressure. There's a loaded agenda, and there are compulsory statutory items like related party, a couple of other things that one has to discuss, internal audit report, statutory auditor report. So there may not be sufficient time to spend on some of the non-financial items which we talked earlier. So many of the audit committees now have calendarized non-financial, non-quarter-end audit committee meetings, sometimes focusing primarily on contingent liabilities or taxation. Next time, primarily on the the related party or some of the accounting basis or a new accounting standards, sometimes on cybersecurity, and separately on external fraud risk assessment, effectiveness of internal audit, and so on and so forth, where they are not really related to quarter-end activities, but they require by rotation some kind of a deep dive. Sometimes even external consultants are engaged in those meetings. I think that is kind of gives fair amount of time, no time constraint, and typically they are full day meetings once a month or at least once a mid-quarter. The advantage of this also kind of helps the load, because the quarter-end meetings, rightly so, have to really focus on the financial numbers and the financial statements and the disclosures. That gives enough room to get into, drill down into some of those specific items. Now, the other part, of course, here is both the company secretaries as well as, I'm sure Jyotin will, appreciate this, who also kind of have to play a very critical role in terms of streamlining the agenda. I think some are clearly for noting, some are clearly for much deeper discussion. I think prioritizing the agenda becomes a fair amount of work. I think earlier it was probably not that critical. Now I think since there will be multiple audit committee meetings during the quarter, how to kind of streamline the agenda and to make sure that the attention of the committee is spent on mostly on the critical items. External advisors and consultants is one of the most common way of diversified expertise, not necessarily only in non-financial areas. For example, increasingly, I have seen the audit committees insisting that the fraud risk assessment is not done by internal audit department. At least once a year in high-risk areas, external firms do fraud risk assessment, so that there is of course, each area can change every year. That is one very popular way. Similarly, the penetration testing for cybersecurity is always external, even though there is a very competent internal security team. And broad-based AC audit committee, which I talked about earlier. Now, coming to management engagement, this has become very, very critical. Now, it is also a consultative process. I think as long as management gets a trust, saying that, look, audit committee is also some kind of a line of defense for the corporation. I can share certain things. I can also provide a perspective and also take inputs, and kind of, I can be frank with them, saying that, look, these are all the pragmatic challenges, and this is what the corporation is trying to do. And these are all the options that we have. Typically, what happens is by the time it comes to the agenda, to the final, formal meeting, the amount of discussion that is possible on the options and alternatives are very, very limited, almost always at the fag end. So I think more and more, I think here the chair of the audit committee probably can take a lead role in providing that access and trust and flexibility to the management team, whether it is CEO or CFO or compliance, so that some of the touchy items can be openly discussed one-on-one, and a very frank feedback and inputs or suggestions can be taken there. I have personally found this very helpful, so that there are no surprises when we meet for the audit committee meeting. There are no kind of unexpected agenda items which requires a lot of application of judgment. Now, of course, this has to kind of build over the mutual trust and comfort level over a period of time. Likewise with auditors. Many times the auditor engagement during the quarter helps in kind of understanding some of the challenges that they have, both in terms of information requirements, because audit committee, especially the chair, can intervene in a very effective way so that both timeliness and access to data is possible. Typically what happens is everything get punched up towards the end and so on and so forth. And they also can give certain inputs on some of the improvement areas in processes or systems much more directly in one-on-one rather than in a formal meeting. So I think that is another at least once a month engagement with the auditor, and also kind of they could access on at least on the critical matters for that particular period. So I would say that even in the continuous learning, while company-specific information may not be kind of shared, but nothing is stopping from audit committees to kind of have a peer networks and kind of invite them outside in a much more informal way to kind of share some of the key best practices relating to particular industry, even globally. I think that we have found useful. Yeah, next slide, please. But beyond all that, I would like to kind of stress upon a couple of points. Whether we like it or not, I think the CFO and the finance team is the primary touch point, at least for large part of the agenda. Now, kind of the reason is the CFO and the finance team is probably the only function, finance is the only function in a company that has a very unique enterprise view. For example, the business heads or the salespeople or the HR have functional view, but the enterprise end-to-end view typically the finance team has because of its nature, because every transaction goes through it, whether it's the payments or the acquisitions, every piece goes through it. They have unique one touch point of management information system. I think that can be a sounding board for the audit committee and probably even for the board on many of the things. The bottom 4 items are classical ones, but increasingly we do see, I'm sure all of you also agree, that the finance team is playing more and more strategic role, more and more engaging role in key decision making, and CFO is clearly a clear decision maker along with the CEO in most of the decisions. So I think that engagement and building trust with the CFO, I think is super critical. Next. But I think clearly, next one, please. I think building trust with the CFO probably is one of the most important aspects for the for the effectiveness for the chairman of the audit committee. I'm sure all of you would agree. I think setting expectation, look, tell me before others tell me. Say it as you see it. Well, there will be some bad news, there will be some good news, but at least the reality one should know, the audit committee, and how to address this is then really the next question. I think also clearly the expectation is like not problem stating, and there also has to be problem solving, especially relating to disclosures, especially relating to some of the accounting matters. And see, some of the increasingly we have seen that the role of the finance team, the role and the competencies required in a finance team are also significantly changing. And it would be in the interest of the audit committee to ensure that the finance team, and especially the CFO's role and his or her direct reports, bring in a very good set of skills, which I'll talk in the next slide. Yeah. So I think the more and more the audit committee kind of insists that, look, we need a broad-based finance team where the focus is not just transaction, but also analytical focus. And in the limited time of the audit committee, some of the presentations, in addition to numbers, also the clear story, otherwise it can get very, very muddled in the whole thing. And also, there is always, between the business, the auditors, and the finance, there are some kind of always multiple perspectives, and the conflict resolution skill set, the consulting mindset, and more importantly, the negotiating mindset. And increasingly, the technology appreciation in the finance team has become important. So I think as long as the audit committee keeps tab on, look, what is the broad skill set that the finance team collectively presents? Does it have these kind of skill sets collectively at the CFO level or CFO -1, the individual functional heads within the finance team? That will bring enormous support to the audit committee in all its functions that it conducts. So I think broadly, focusing much more sharply than earlier days on the composition of the finance team, the expertise of the finance team, which is much more broad-based, is going to help in a long way, in my view. So broadly, I think these are the thoughts I had to share in how, based on my experience, how some of the audit committees have tried to tackle the core issues that we discussed earlier, and how to navigate with some of the mechanisms and interventions so that the role that audit committee continues to play stays relevant, stays effective. And I'm sure all of you would agree, this is not the end of the story, and more is going to come on the audit committee's plate. So let me just stop here. I think I would be happy to take questions towards the end of the session, as Mr. Balakrishnan said. And thank you once again for this opportunity to share, and look forward to hearing your perspectives and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranganath, for excellent address by you, highlighting issues of corporate committee, how they can tackle the tackle the new issues arising, and how the boards can remain engaged with the audit committee and the management to make the things easier. So thank you very much. I now welcome Ms. Rachel Johnson to give her special address. And Ms. Johnson, you have around 15 minutes for your address, please. Ms. Rachel Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Rajan.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event on the increasingly focal topic of the challenges and fast evolving role of audit committees. The ACCA has a special partnership with the Institute of Directors in India, so I'm ever so grateful for this opportunity to share our insights on this subject here today. Thank you also, Mr. Ranganath, for his comprehensive presentation on the Next Generation Audit Committee. I will hopefully reiterate some of his valid points. So there really is no doubt that the trials and tribulations boards have faced throughout the pandemic are unlike ever before. More and more stakeholders are raising their voices, whilst an expanding coalition of investors and prudential regulators from all around the world are rapidly increasing their expectations of companies. Boards are being challenged with hard, never-before-asked questions on top of new regulations, as well as proposed changes to corporate governance codes and accounting standards globally. As the pandemic exacerbates existential threats and trends, and the world moves forward with further audit reform, more light indeed is being shed on boards, audit cares around the world about the evolving role of audit committees in this respect, in terms of the committee's purpose, as well as its understanding of what does constitute a good audit. The common consensus is that audit committees' effectiveness is integral to business integrity, and that is what I would like to concentrate on here today. How can audit committees help shape the companies of the future? Companies that will survive and thrive in the rapidly changing post-pandemic era. So to start, I think the pandemic has forced audit committees to take on a more facilitation role. The committee, given its duty of care, has naturally been forced to engage more in terms of both supporting and challenging senior management. It has become the conscious of good risk management and success management in terms of helping the organization achieve its goals. We see in smaller organizations where there is not the luxury of a full-fledged risk management function, the audit committee plays the vital role of building and ensuring much needed resiliency. During the pandemic, the flow of information in communicating and evaluating risks sped up tremendously as the velocity of the disruptions increased dramatically. And these weren't necessarily about new risks, but just different sort of angles around emerging risks, both financial and non-financial, and how the materiality of them impacted the business's vitality. So whilst there has been a real sense of heightened alertness and organizational adrenaline, the audit committee is there to understand how the dots on the risk register connect. Because as everyone around the world has learned, these risks are in fact intertwined and very much connected. And I think the audit committee's role of supporting the organization, working with all board members and senior management in articulating, analyzing, and addressing the risks has quickly become a key component to any company's lifeline. Let's also think about the important relationships and communications in this regard. Before COVID-19 struck, an audit committee would typically meet 4 times a year, but the pandemic has accelerated and increased that frequency. Certainly much of the decision-making has become day by day, for sure, in the first lockdown, and I believe this frequency has changed forever now, and we'll be seeing at least week by week in the new norm. So from a risk assessment standpoint, audit committees have been forced to become a lot more agile, a lot more frequent, and definitely a lot more dynamic. The audit committee's relationship with senior management has taken on a new meaning within days in terms of deciphering the relevant risk information and ensuring a clear sense of direction. We are seeing audit committees become this new lens, if you like, in creating visibility for all involved. But this has not been easy at all. Last month, we held a roundtable discussion of our own on audit and risk committees as part of my research on an overarching campaign on rethinking risk. And one of the polling questions showed that relationships with senior management was the toughest challenge for the attendees, and was what was keeping them up at night. Audit committee members must be brave in this respect because they need to initiate some of the most uncomfortable conversations in order to collect the right information, and I mean truthful information that they need in order to make sound decisions. And they need these discussions to be ongoing. This is really where I think the true tests lie, because you can have the best audit in the world, but if you don't have these relationships and the lines of communications with them needed to get to the bottom of the issues, then you won't have what it takes to be trusted and therefore be effective. Audit committees need to be always present. They need to create that two-way street of communicating to make sure that all the questions are asked. The relationships are constantly in the building and improving mode. Getting to know the people is really just as important as getting to know the risks, and it is a journey. The reality, though, is that many audit committees around the world have tended to brush things under the carpet. They will have a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan, and they'll stick to that blindly without really digging and doing what additional checks and balances need doing, or looking at all of the what-if scenarios and making sure appropriate mitigation is in place. So members of the audit committees have that mandate. They have a duty to ask the challenging questions and to hold the senior leadership teams to account. And again, this is both in terms of support and challenge. If there's one silver lining in what has happened over the past year, it is these conversations that COVID-19 has forced all board members to have, not only amongst themselves and the senior management, but with all stakeholders and shareholders. One of the hardest tasks always has been for audit committees throughout and highlighted throughout this crisis has been meeting the different interests of all their employees, customers, investors, lenders, regulators, communities, suppliers, and all these groups of individuals who are impacted by their decisions. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to remind us that you need different perspectives and different backgrounds and different expertise in order to address these varied needs. Audit committees, therefore, should not consist of only accountants, and even I will attest to that. Accountants are necessary, yes, to understand what the numbers mean and to detect gaps and red flags such as fraud. But some of the most pressing issues in audit committee agenda today in 2021 are facing is things like mental health and, of course, the health and safety of their stakeholders. And they need to make sure there is more than just acknowledgement of this. They also need to act. Risk registers tended to gather dust before the pandemic, in my view, and I think audit committees have had a bit of a wake-up call in terms of not just mapping out a business continuity plan, but realizing that it needs to be tested and it needs to be checked that it is fit for purpose. It is important, of course, to do all of these colorful and pretty risk analysis, but it is not effective unless it is complemented by sufficient action. Audit committees have learned that this is what operational resilience is all about. So in order to actually achieve operational resilience, you need an audit committee that is asking different questions, not ones that are always agreeing and looking at things the same way or one-dimensionally. The pandemic has certainly proved the importance of board composition and how a well-diversified pool of thought can help committees better understand their risks and their people, their audiences. It also is not about probabilities anymore. Even the best risk quants will tell you that, as we have learned. It's about the unknowns. And audit committees are there to learn how to manage these risks versus the uncertainties like never before. In today's world, audit committees need things like HR experience, human resources, and of course, as Mr. Ragnar mentioned, technological expertise, whether it's cyber or working from home. The committee needs legal eyes and scientific minds if they are able to act on all these issues and again, gain the trust of their stakeholders. Sometimes the scientists could look at things in only one way, but having all these different perspectives at the table together is imperative. It is simply good corporate governance. In general, we believe audit committees should be predominantly made up of non-executive members. The committee serves to both challenge and support management, and it cannot do that effectively if the members are all in the management. Nevertheless, we definitely believe there should be a few key executives on the board, on the committee, who have the ability to call on the appropriate expertise and responsibilities within the organization. And I don't mean only the CEO or even C-suite. I mean connecting with people like, for example, in human resources again, because the relationship with HR and marketing and other business units is crucial in building a healthy corporate culture and making sure that that risk awareness is firm-wide. Overall, that the NEDs should consist of a financially qualified chair, with the rest having a variety of backgrounds that enable them to challenge the different thoughts and experiences around the table. It is absolutely essential that the audit committee is forward-looking as well as backward-facing. And you might have heard or read that in the UK, the regulators are looking at, the FRS has been looking at whether we should be establishing standards or new rules around the chair of an audit committee. So we will be watching that space carefully. Things still are evolving and developing, but we are seeing a lot of organizations becoming more comfortable with this new level of awareness, risk awareness. I think from the audit committee perspective, definitely is an increased desire now for more and more information and more analysis around this, around some of the key risks, at least. So how do we mitigate risk and deal with the situations faster and in a more timely manner? How do we make better decisions more quickly? This type of swifter action and agility is really what it takes to survive the new normal. And organizations that have this kind of audit committee lens are going to be the strong ones that are able to navigate this fast-changing risk landscape of the 2020s. Certainly, there are companies struggling to stay afloat, but there are also some organizations that say they have surprised themselves in terms of how well they have adopted to remote working, for example. So it's not all bad news. And in terms of learning and adapting, there have been some strengths that the crisis has uncovered as well. So as we all know, organizations have had to adopt new technologies. And here we are all on Zoom, which I didn't even know what Zoom was this time last year. And we've all adopted new ways of working. And we've all done this in a matter of weeks. And from the audit committee's perspective, they have had to look at the risks much more strategically than before. They've had to take a step back and not just think about risk mitigation, but also the opportunistic side of risk and how they can help the organization achieve their strategic objectives, how they can align this through the organization's internal control framework and integrate and into an integrated reporting framework. Audit committees have had to look at material issues in a different light, with horizon scanning and with the very much crucial scenario planning. And this is all about looking to the future, looking at material issues that have the potential to influence the ability of the business to deliver its strategic objectives. I think that has proved to be a very important duty of the audit committee. These material issues will have several scenarios, and understanding what these are helps the business optimize its future. The perfect example here is sustainability, climate change, and the organization's impact on the environment and society. Climate change can be a significant material issue, but you have to home in and realize that flooding, for example, is the risk, one of the risks in this respect that you need to address. So when I say strategic risk, I mean looking at these material issues in different ways and aligning your approach to them with the company's objectives. What we have learned is that all these risks cascade across the business, across its supply and value chains. So the audit committee is tasked with making sure that the due diligence is done and that the organization knows its stakeholders, knows who it's doing business with, and knows whether they are who we think they are in terms of their own sustainability strategies and track records on those. It is about making sure this risk awareness runs all the way through the food chain so there are no blind spots and no lack of attention. We have climate change, an economic crisis, a global health crisis. So that's the strategy change right there, if there is ever one. The audit committee is there to drive the culture, the awareness, and the responses to this from the top. Now, I could carry on talking about climate risk and the challenges facing audit committees, and indeed the changing climate of assurance in this respect all day. But I will start to wrap up by saying new regulations and investor expectations, that collective action I mentioned earlier, are increasingly focused on climate risk disclosures, being the responsibility of the audit committee. This still can vary across businesses and sectors and borders. And if you consider comparing energy and financial services, for example, each has a different stage of evolution, given the varied organizational models and, again, existential threats to the business. It also depends on whether the company is in the business of selling carbon, selling to customers who use carbon, or financing economic development, which can can either exacerbate financial disclosures, or TCFD as we say, has been a helpful impetus in calling for companies to improve their accounting for climate risks. As we know, many other accounting standard setters, for example, the Financial Accounting Standards Boards, ISAB, IFRS, they're all also pushing the climate agenda into the audit committee's metrics. As many of you on audit committees can attest, measuring carbon emissions directly and indirectly related to the company's operation is not easy. We find carbon accounting is laden with estimates and judgments, and understanding the numbers and their implications is very challenging. Although standards continue to develop and do change for the better, we know that they need to serve, and particularly when we're talking across, the focuses are on risks to propagate and transport, automobiles, if you like, while the energy sector is naturally more focused on its core business and transitioning that into one which is not dependent on carbon production. Conversations might have different angles and be a priority for audit committees in both sectors. To sum up, audit committees around the world are becoming more involved with climate strategy. They are playing a much bigger role in what goes into annual reports and statements. As noted earlier, with new regulations and the focus on assessing their internal control frameworks and driving new ways of thinking about these risks from the top down. So I see the assurance responsibility crucial going forward. And the insurance industry itself is taking on a new meaning in terms of how companies understand their risks, progress, and of managing them, and in terms of measuring impact. I believe audit committees will be at the center of this complete transformation as issues around climate change and indeed digital transformations too continue to accelerate. So thank you very much, Mr. Reid.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Rachel Johnson, for your special address. And you touched a very important point on climate change, which we are all facing today. And the audit committee has to be more engaged on the climate change aspect also. You also emphasize the importance of relationships and communications between the audit committee and the management, and also the need for based audit committee. So thank you very much, Rachel Johnson. And we can please stay back for the question and answer session after this panel discussion. This follows next. And now I request Mr. Arun Balakrishnan to take over the panel discussion. And roughly you have around 75 to 80 minutes for the panel discussion. We have 4 speakers. And after that, we'll have question and answer session for all the speakers. Thank you very much, Mr. Balakrishnan.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Rajan. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Arun Balakrishnan, the chairman of the IOD Bangalore chapter, and I am your host for the balance part of this program. Let me start by thanking Mr. Ranganath and Ms. Rachel Johnson for their enlightening presentations. Special thanks to Ms. Johnson for giving an international flavor to the program by bringing in what's happening outside India. We have 4 eminent speakers in this panel who have seen enough audit committee meetings of public and private sector companies, both listed and unlisted companies, family-controlled companies, as well as large private companies. Their collective experience should cover all the positive and negative news that one reads in the newspapers off and on these days. I'll be introducing them as I invite them to speak, though Rajan has already given a very detailed introduction to each one of them. After each of the speakers complete their presentations, budgeted 15 minutes each, the forum will be open for Q&A. We have budgeted 30 to 45 minutes for this, depending on your queries. Kindly use the chat box for this purpose. Kindly keep the questions short and crisp. You can also name the speaker from whom you need the answer, or if it's a general question, I shall be directing them to the speakers concerned. I'll be repeating this again when we start the Q&A. Getting along with the program, let me start with Mr. Manoj Kumar Vijay, our first speaker in the panel. Manoj is a partner at BSR and Company LLP, and yes, I think it's already been, profile has already been talked about. Let me repeat the key parts of it. Manoj has over 27 years of experience in audit and assurance services, particularly in the financial services sector. He has significant experience of international reporting, US listed, SEC registered bank reporting under US GAAP, IFRS, including the diligence services in the financial services sector. Over to you, Manoj.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balakrishnan. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And first of all, I must thank the Institute of Directors of Bangalore for inviting me for this. And I'm really privileged to be participating in this program. Thank you very much, sir. Let me just put on my slides. Just let me know if it's visible.
Yeah, it's on, it's on.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll just put the slides. So as Mr. Balakrishna mentioned, I have been fortunate to work in an audit firm and almost for 23 years now, and I've been a partner in BSR & Co. for almost 15 years, and I had the privilege of engaging with a variety of audit committees over these years, whether it's a banking side or non-banking, SEC type of, US listed type of companies. So what I would try to attempt is to try and share my perspective, given the various engagements I've had with the various audit committees over these years. To begin with, let me try and just say what I tried to cover, and I think Mr. Ranganathan and Rachel both have covered, given a good context, so I will try to flip through some of the stuff they have mentioned quickly. What I would touch upon is basically how the current environment is creating a bit of a challenge for the audit committees today, and based on that, how the role of the audit committee is evolving and the effectiveness in which they have to operate. And some topics like climate change, etc., new emerging topics, which has already been touched upon, but that brings a different kind of a challenge for the audit committees. Also, I thought I will touch upon, a perspective that how the audit committees are evolving in today's time, based on our experience of global organizations that we work with, how the transformation journey is happening from a good to a great audit committee, if I may say. And maybe we can open that for as we do the question answer session to hear your perspective. And in the end, I'll just give you, a general perspective of what we believe could be the kind of agenda for the audit committee for the coming year in the given scenario where we are. So just at a high level, a lot of things are happening across, right? We talked about COVID already, and that's created something very different environment for last 1 year. The fact that we are all sitting at our homes and probably doing this seminar itself is, a witness to the fact that how the things are changing. I can tell you that most of the audits for the March 20 year-end and the quarterly reviews have all happened in this remote environment. And all the audit committees I've attended over the last few quarters have been remotely. One would have never anticipated actually that such a thing would be ever possible, but we are seeing a new world. And what we are seeing is it will all lead to a very different environment. One is, I think the technology is changing rapidly. There are business models which will be impacted. Changes in the way we'll work will get impacted. Companies will, a lot of companies are talking about going concern, etc., because, survival has become a big issue on certain kind of industries. And to top it all, there are a lot of things which we will talk about in the later part of my discussion on the corporate governance side, the questions that are coming up. Having, seen this, there is a lot of economic uncertainty around. And given that scenario, the dramatic, political swings, policy changes is definitely creating a lot of pressure on organizations. And at the backdrop of this, where the financial statements are getting produced, etc., where the audit committees will have a much tougher challenges as we come across. And then to add to it, if you look at it, there is a wide landscape of regulatory perspective that is coming in, whether it's a corporate laws, accounting standards, central bank guidelines. For some of the people in the banking industry must be aware that a huge number of circulars were issued on a regular basis. There are a lot of regulatory updates happening. Budget is bringing up a lot of changes. And then there are a lot of external events that we see today are giving a very different perspective and a different, what I would put it, a challenge to the audit committee, I would put it. We have a new world where the private equity venture capital investors are coming and becoming part of the boards, right? Their expectations and how they see the corporate governance angle is going to be another driver to the whole thing. We have institutional investors, proxy advisors, media, shareholder activism. All these things are actually going to be at the backdrop of how the audit committee will function. And of course, there are corporate governance standards which have been laid down. I won't spend too much time. All of you are familiar with it. But just to give you a perspective, Companies Act, SEBI regulations, ICI, ICSI standards are all there for the audit committees, for the corporate governance of an organization. The question that is always asked is, are these enough actually? Would there be something more that one would expect? We did some study and I have read about it in the past. Probably in India, in these standards would be actually not too far behind in some of the global scenario. While we may have issues or challenges in various things, but on corporate governance standards and the legislation that is available, we are not too far behind. Then the question that arises is what are these legislations, etc., and how they are defining the roles. While Mr. Ranganathan did lay down, certain emerging things that the audit committee are expected as part of their role, this is a list of, a bare mandatory stuff which the audit committee is supposed to actually take responsibility for. Why I'm saying this is mandatory, because this is part of the law and there are penal provisions for non-compliance. So whether it is appointment and monitoring of auditors, whether oversight on the financial reporting role, whether approval of related party transactions today, intercompany loans, the oversight on the whole control environment on the financial reporting process and management controls, plus the valuations of the undertaking as and when any transactions happen. The new norm that we are seeing now, which is very prominent, at least based on my experience as auditors, whistleblower mechanism has become a new thing actually in most of the companies. It's quite rampant. A lot of traction is happening on this, and a number of frauds are being unearthed through this whistleblower mechanism. So direct role of an audit committee and the part it plays becomes very relevant. What is also important is sometimes the subsidiaries that are there in large companies and what is the oversight role that an audit committee can play could be another element which is relevant from an audit committee perspective. And let me pause by also saying that when we talked about the legislation and the role that is defined, having said that, we are still seeing a lot more kind of action in terms of corporate governance failures. These are all public headlines, public news. In spite of all the best of efforts being put up, there are several things which we keep reading about questioning on the corporate governance side, on the risk management side, whether it's an independence issue, conflict issue. Basically, is the question that comes in while the regulations are evolving, culture and ethics, are they actually keeping pace with that? And that is something that I would want to spend a few more, minutes on that, because regulations wise, I think as a country, we have enough. What is required is, how do we implement them? And based on our experience, we try to put down together certain common pitfalls, what we believe we have seen in various companies, etc., or on the basis of the various news items in the last 1 or 2 years that we are seeing more often. There are director compensation issues where the director's compensation has been questioned in the AGMs. There are conflict of interest issues where there are questions around, the declaration of independence by the board of directors or the audit committee members, or not voicing the governance issues on timely basis in certain companies. In a large NBFC, we are all familiar. There was a question on the focusing on the risk management side on a timely basis, whether there was a failure on a due diligence done on certain aspects. In an interesting case, there was also a disregard, of a shareholder interest. Then there are questions around defaults in payments and whether there was a delay in, being notified by the audit committee and the boards, failure in discharging the duties, and probably, the governance frameworks and the lack of it actually, how one is able to deal with those situations in this country. So these are some of the broad themes that we have seen as pitfalls. So that leads to certain questions which come up. Why do we see these government failures actually? Have the laws been ineffective, or is there something wrong in the corporate culture that is there? Or are the independent directors actually independent of the companies? Because we've seen mixed bag on this, and that's why these are the questions that come up actually whenever these failures come up. And one of the things that I feel is, I think while the regulations are evolving and we have robust regulations, I think the core principles that remain constant in any kind of thing is basically certain intangible stuff. And while everything can be regulated, this is something, a culture which needs to be established in an organizations to make it work. And that's where we'll come to the later part of my discussion on how the audit committee can play a big part and a board can play a big part in such kind of in developing a culture in an organization like this, or implementing in a culture. Because culture is the big thing. It is important in an organization. We can have enough number of laws, but if the culture is not right, we can't do anything. Role of transparency and building trust with various stakeholders, very critical. There are organizations which are doing very well, but at the drop of a hat, there are issues we have seen recently where there are questions on transparency, disclosures, whether stock markets are actually valuing them appropriately in spite of the best results. And that is the result of how they view the transparency angle. The importance of integrity and ethics, very critical. Audit committees have to lead this by example actually in organizations, have to create a certain sort of a example in the organization itself, right? Non-zero tolerance type of attitude would actually go a long way in building a culture that we're talking about. Then on the independence piece, which is again very critical and the regulators are watching it very, very closely, is independence by law and independence by spirit. We are seeing a thin line actually where sometimes in spirit looks like the independence is not there or it's vitiated. And that's what is going to become a key element for making sure that you're above, or the audit committees that you all represent are above board. This is one of the big tests which will be there. And what we are seeing more importantly is the evaluation of the board's contribution or the audit committee's contribution in their role. This is also emerging as one of the key elements in driving a good governance culture in an organization. Having said that, so what's changing actually? While regulatory focus we talked about, there is a big focus happening on the governance side, and I already spoke about. And what is happening is, governance-wise, we have all the standards. The question that is coming up is, are we actually complying in spirit? And for that, a strong foundation of monitoring and enforcement culture is required. This will ensure that there is a protection of the stakeholders, which the audit committees has an accountability and a responsibility actually to ensure that their interests are protected. And in I think as a derivation, whether to create a long-term value based on this kind of a approach that one is following. What is corporate governance then? Basically, it's a very intangible stuff, and I know we are all used to using this word, but primarily as defined, one quote I liked, it is about intellectual honesty and not just sticking to the rules and regulations. This is a quote by Mervyn King, and I think there is a lot of message in that, what it is being said. So it's just not trying to stick to the rules, but going beyond that and ensuring that in spirit it's followed. And that is how corporate governance would be key for this. And how do the boards actually, use this opportunity to create that culture? One is adding the diversity, ensuring independence, building a good governance culture across organizations, ensuring comprehensive risk management. And I already talked about a zero tolerance, because at the board level, audit committee level, if there's a zero tolerance culture, that will go a long way in driving across the management cadre the philosophy in which the accountability for governance is established by the board. And maybe it looks like a crowded slide. So I would want you to focus on the left-hand side primarily. What are the key elements to make an audit committee effective, actually, to ensure that such high levels of governance is met? One is clearly on the membership side, ensuring the right experience and the right expertise is there. Active involvement, not only in terms of, just attending audit committees, but what happens between audit committees, what happens in the boardroom discussions, driving the audit committee agenda effectively. As we spoke earlier, Mr. Ranganathan covered that it's a very heavy agenda. Lots of things fall in the plate of an audit committee, and prioritizing becomes key. Communication across the organizations is very key. Informal meetings, tone at the top, and also making sure that the right leadership of the audit committee is there. An audit committee chair plays a very important role actually to putting this together. And that will make sure that there is ensuring the audit committee effectiveness is there. Some things, what I saw was there's a lot of pressure on the workload of audit committee actually. Now this may look a little, simple, but it is very critical that audit committee remains focused. They have to say no, because everything by default falls on the plate of an audit committee actually. Anything comes up, normally board would lean up to an audit committee. So one should decide actually what should be the priority. The face time in the boardroom is precious. They need to make sure that they focus. Ensuring that the right amount of time is spent with management, auditors, outside the boardroom also. I mean, a one-to-one again, in-camera type of meetings are becoming more and more prominent. And how does the work get spread out through the year of the audit committee? And looking at very closely in terms of the risk oversight approach that an audit committee does. Some of the larger organizations have started splitting this role actually between risk management and audit committee. So something that is very critical as well. And this, I just want to leave a thought that good to great, what are the elements that will lead to an audit committee's good to great kind of a thing? As very important that there are succession plannings, board evaluations, a good audit committee chair, and separating the role of a chairman and a CEO becomes very critical. I mean, I will leave with one question to you all in the audit committee. How would you see your board actually? Is it a foundational board? Is it developed? Is it advanced? Or is it moved to the strategic level as we talked about? In the end, I would just leave you with this kind of a thing. This is something we believe in today's environment becomes very critical for an audit committee in the 2021 agenda. These are some elements, particularly ESG, etc. Everybody talked about. Reinforcing audit quality becomes very important aspect in today's environment where audits are happening in a remote way. Internal audit function, focus on ethics, compliance, culture, and how do you actually make sure that the financial reporting disclosures that we talked about earlier are there. And with that, actually, I want to leave with this last note that a good governance culture actually definitely gives a premium to an organizations. An audit committee can play a very leading role in ensuring that all the stakeholders are actually benefiting with the role it plays. That was a brief thing I wanted to cover, Mr. Balakrishnan, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm happy to stay back for the questions and cover it later on. Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Manoj. Very interesting. Intellectual honesty is what corporate governance is all about. Excellent. Right. What you talked finally about the evolution of the board at various stages of the evolution of the board and the audit committee is also very pertinent, how we become mature in the kind of activities we have on the board and the audit committee as well. Thank you very much then.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Could you please come out of your share screen now? Okay. Right.
Is it still there, sir?
No, I think it's out.
No, sir. Your share screen is disabled now, and your video is also disabled.
Okay, fine. Right. So we move on to the next speaker, Mr. Jyotin Mehta. Jyotin has over 38 years in finance, secretarial and quality excellence initiatives and enterprise risk management and internal audit. He is a board member in many companies, including an Indian subsidiary of an MNC and also a small finance bank. presently holds the position of chairman of the Audit Committee of Linde India Limited and is an independent director in multiple companies. And I am with him in Linde India as well, in the Audit Committee as well, and onto the board. And I have first-hand experience of the sagacity and wisdom of Jyotin as far as the audit is concerned, apart from the board and other committees that he is in. Jyotin, all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Balakrishnan, for that introduction. In fact, I am privileged to be here at this event, and I thank IOD and thank you for this opportunity. As my previous speakers have already mentioned, I think Audit Committee agenda is sort of very comprehensive, very wide. And therefore, today in my session, I have decided to focus on about 4 topics, which I believe can play a big role in making the Audit Committee functioning very effective. So the 4 topics I have chosen, one is the oversight on related party transactions. The second one is the leveraging of your internal audit function and engaging with the internal audit function to make sure that the audit committee is on the top of the role on control environment. The third one is about partnering with the statutory auditors. I think Manoj in the earlier session has already touched on this, but I would like to sort of give more of my practical experience and tips on what I believe can be done. And the last one is a topic which I feel is becoming important across all positions of the management, but more so in the case of roles of the CFO and also to some extent the CIA in an organization. So let me start, and I'll spend about 15 minutes on covering all these 4 topics. The first one is about the oversight on related party transactions. One of the pitfalls I have seen in both the audit committee as well as in the board functioning, which can have some implication on the board role, is about the way in which compliance items get handled. You know, very often we call these as routine, and we just possibly ask a question saying, hope there are no exceptions, hope everything is okay, and we move on to the next item. I think what I would say is when we talk of related party transactions, there are certain areas where we have to be very careful about when functioning as a member of the audit committee. The first one is it's not the transaction per se, but what is the system? What is the policy? What are the automated controls that have been made possible, implemented in your ERP to identify relative party transactions? It's not what gets reported, but is there a system to make sure that nothing gets missed out? That's the first aspect I think we need to be sure about. Then when related party transactions do happen, we have this process of getting omnibus approvals at the audit committee at the beginning of the year. And quite often, we also have midterm corrections to these omnibus approvals. Again, in my view, this is something which, as an audit committee member, I would like to know why should those midterm corrections be required. So initially you have an omnibus approval, and possibly when this gets approved, there is discussion, there is justification that is provided. And therefore, when deviations do happen, I think the audit committee needs to be very clear as to why these have become necessary. Again, here what happens is that the omnibus approvals get approved usually at the last audit committee meeting of the financial year, and therefore there is often a rush. Wherever I can influence, I have suggested that this be done at a meeting slightly before the year ends, because it can get the required attention that I believe audit committee should be giving to it. We all know about making sure that there is justification, the pricing is on arm's length basis, it's an ordinary course of business. I think these things are fine and well accepted. But what sometimes get missed out is the documentation about this justification, the articulation of that justification, and ensuring that enough information is shared with the audit committee to make make the audit committee understand why that transaction becomes essential. So I think that is one part, again, in a rush, we should not be missing out. In terms of way you handle related party, because it is impossible for the audit committee to look at all the transactions that happen. So either you use your internal auditors, or maybe better still, you can have an independent firm that can do just a review of the related transaction process and also the transactions that happen in a quarter. So which means you have about 4 reportings by those independent firms to make sure that the RPTs are within the framework that has been defined. And then, of course, we always have the benefit of looking at the statutory auditors' observations on this, and the internal audit. Other observations also sometimes give you a feeling whether something is getting missed out. So, as far as the related party transactions are concerned, I think it is not something of a routine compliance. It's a possible landmine, because you have different types of companies, different types of cultures, and particularly where the structure is very complex. You have multiple subsidiaries, or you have a parent overseas, and then the company is here. These transactions get scrutinized from various angles, including compliance and taxation. So it's a topic which I believe audit committees should give due attention, and also make sure that they have a process of assurance for the committee to make sure that these transactions are happening within not only the compliance framework, but within the spirit of what the compliance wants you to do. So that is my take as far as the oversight of related party transactions are concerned. Let's take up the next topic, which I think is very dear to me for various reasons. One is that I have myself been an internal auditor in an organization, and I've also seen how some of the audit committees miss out the opportunity of leveraging the strength and the expertise of internal audit in making sure that the audit committee effectiveness is upheld. So how do you do that? I think one of the things I like to follow is to make sure that you have informal discussions with the chief internal auditor or head of audit, or if it's an outsourced firm, the engagement partner of that firm, to make sure that one, the audit committee expectations are clearly articulated to the internal auditor, and two, making sure that 2 important factors are taken care of. One is the independence of the internal auditor. It is on paper definitely reporting into the audit committee, but we have to make sure that we are able to get that assurance that it actually exists. The other thing is about the access that the internal auditor has in terms of information. And I have seen companies that often exclude the chief internal auditor in some key discussions, saying that it does not pertain to internal audit, or that business guys feel very uncomfortable when some matters are being discussed if the internal auditor is present. And again, I would insist, in fact, wherever I am on the committee, I like to make sure that the access to information across the organization is always there for chief internal auditor. And at the end of the day, I think it is important for the audit committee as well as the management to realize that effective internal auditor goes a long way in protecting the organization, the interests of the management, and the interests of the board. So I believe that you need to establish not only a good rapport, not only a good support to the chief internal auditor, but also, in addition to that, mentor the chief internal auditor, persuade and encourage deployment of technology. I mean, we are in the age of data analytics and volumes of information, and we are still supposed to be accountable for everything that gets recorded in financial reports. So how do you do it? So you get your internal auditors to deploy technology, and also in terms of the talent development and retention. And that's where I believe that a succession plan for chief internal auditor should at least be an informal agenda of the audit committee, because these days, if that's a very key position as far as the internal audit infrastructure, I mean the audit committee infrastructure is concerned. So I feel audit committees need to be conscious of this and develop ways by which try to find out ways by which you can leverage the internal audit function in a way that will support the audit committee proceedings. The next one is again a very dear topic to me, the way we interact with the statutory auditors. I think some of the audit committees I have observed in some of the meetings, they tend to think that since we approve the remuneration and the appointment of, recommend the appointment of the auditors, we are sort of superior, or we can ask questions and they cannot ask questions. I think we have to get over that. We are actually partnering with statutory auditors in ensuring that governance principles are upheld in the organization, and that our the stakeholders' interests are protected. So how do you make sure that you build on this partnership and use it to the maximum in terms of discharging your functions as an audit committee member? The most, I'll give an example. Most of the auditors are very, very proactive. Whenever there is regulatory change happening, you will find an email in your box coming in within 24 hours, whether it's a union budget, whether it's an RBI requirement, something. You always find the auditors are willing to give you that information immediately with possibly some interpretation. And that's an opportunity for you to pick up the phone and maybe talk to them and find out, because it's something that they have done proactively for you. I think you need to reciprocate and understand it better. So I think that type of informal interactions with internal auditors, whether it is regulatory changes, accounting, guidelines that come in, that becomes very important. And particularly in the last year, when banks and NBFCs have had so many circulars coming in with relation to the borrowers and how the borrowings have to be treated. I think I found the support from statutory auditors excellent in terms of making the audit committee quickly come to speed with what was expected. So I think it's not just the appointment and quality of the statutory audit that has been done by the auditors, but it is also important that you have that partnership spirit with them, understand the nuances, have, as Rangnath had also mentioned in his keynote address, have those informal discussions with them outside the boardroom to make sure that you build up that trust, which is so essential to make the audit committee effective. Then the last one is about succession planning. I mentioned already about the internal auditor, but I think it's equally important for the CFO. Audit committee can play a great role, because what happens typically is, whether it's internal audit or CFO, audit committee has an opportunity not to interact just with the CFO or the CIA, but also maybe a couple of their team members. You can watch them, how they respond. Usually they are there to provide supporting information, but by asking a couple of questions directly to them, you can gauge whether these guys can fill up if there is any vacancy or sudden departure of the head of internal audit or head of finance in the organization. And that's where I have found, again, a very useful practice, that at least once a year, try to meet up both these crucial teams that support your audit committee functioning. One is the CFO team and one is the CIA team. Have a sort of a small open house, maybe 45 minutes, spend an hour. That time will be well spent, because a lot of things come to you in a very distilled way in the boardroom. But when you interact directly, I think the flavor is very, very different. And it is also a bit of a morale booster for these teams, because in many organizations, if not the CFO, for sure, the CIA is one of the persons who people like to keep at arm's length. So I think both these positions have a very great role to play. And I think it is for the audit committee to support these two positions, and not only just restrict themselves to the boardroom, but go outside, meet them, and help them in talent development, and also making sure that people are having a high morale, because they are the ones who are the feet on ground as far as the audit committee is concerned. So I think these were some of the thoughts I thought I should put across, because as the speakers have said, the agenda for audit committee is huge, and it's impossible to cover everything. But there is one more point I think came to my mind as I was talking, is the collaboration between the audit committee and the risk committee. If there is a separate committee, some companies have that as they're required under the stock exchange, the SEBI regulations. And also how much the internal auditors and the stat auditors are able to have a sort of a deeper insight into this risk management framework and functioning, and not leave it as just as an annual exercise. Because I think I'd mentioned in one of my sessions earlier with IOD that risks don't wait for your annual review. They can come up from anywhere, anytime, 24/7. So I think on that note, I would like to conclude, and I'll be staying on for the question answer session and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyotin. Very interesting. Key things, related party transaction, and what omnibus approvals happen. There are a lot of questions on RPT. I will also be asking one of them. So I'll keep that for the time being. Next to the role of the internal auditor, there was a time when all of us were scared of the internal auditor, because a wrong report means your performance appraisal rating or your job itself was at stake. The internal audit report was bad. And you talked about the respect for statutory auditors. Yes, and without their signature on the balance sheet, we can't progress at all in life. Right, so thank you very much, Jyotin. There are questions coming up, so please stay. Right, our next speaker is Revati Ashok. Revati has recently been awarded the Distinguished Alumnus Award by her alma mater, IIM Bangalore, for her work spanning the corporate world and entrepreneurship and philanthropic work. Besides this, she is the honorary co-founder and managing trustee and former managing director of Trishman Sphere. She is a gold medalist in sectoral specialization from the IIM Bangalore and an independent member of the board of several leading giants in the country, giant companies in the country. She's also a startup evangelist and has been a mentor and strategic advisor to several startups. An active angel investor with investments in over 18 startups. She's on the board of Athena Informix, a public policy and development consulting firm that has a global operations. Revati, all yours.
Thank you, Arun, for that most generous introduction. I think the previous sessions have all been extremely illuminating. And what I will try to do is take off from where some of the others have left. I want to structure my discussion around 3 or 4 topics. One is, what kind of nuanced approaches can the audit committee have in raising the bar of compliance? Because this is a journey and it is not a switch that you can switch on once and it just happens. There is no such thing as good compliance or bad compliance or sufficient compliance or good to great audit committee boards. It's really a journey over time. And my experience over several kinds of companies, whether they be promoter managed companies or investor-led companies, subsidiaries of multinationals, or other Indian global companies, it has to be a nuanced approach. It also depends on the maturity of the organization to receive those inputs. While there is a base requirement that the audit committee is expected to perform, that performance takes time to get to the level that audit committees feel comfortable. This is a journey. And from my personal experience, I have found that this whole issue of building trust and making the management feel that we are with them in building value for the company by doing the right thing, and it is not merely fault finding, then I think that important message is extremely crucial. So what we require is, this has been covered elsewhere, independence in spirit, creating a culture of trust, intellectual honesty. All points were earlier covered by other speakers, but I can't underline how important this is for effective functioning of the audit committee, because you could put all the frameworks in place, but if the culture of listening to the audit committee and what the audit committee chair or the audit committee is telling them is not there, the seriousness is not there, and the management is not committed right from top to bottom, and that culture that there will be zero tolerance to some of these things, we will find that improvement is marginal. And therefore, that is why I say that there will be a kind of maturity model that we have in terms of organizations which are primarily promoter-led, or organizations which are very early in their journey, or organizations that are getting ready for an IPO. So we have multiple situations in different audit committees. And therefore, we have to, the audit committee chair's role is to understand that nuance and understand how can we push the agenda without compromising what is expected, and yet continuously raise the bar. I think that's, and the role, the way in which this is going to be implemented is different when a company is preparing for an IPO, when a company is a subsidiary of the multinational parent, when a company is promoter managed, when a company is already public and has a number of shareholders to respond to. So I think it's a very, very nuanced approach. It requires a lot of maturity on the part of the audit committee chair to drive this agenda. It also depends a lot on the kind of freedom that is given by the chairman of the board as well. Because the chairman of the board can set a very, very big tone as to how seriously they allow the audit committee member to function and provide their inputs, how much time is given at board meetings to brief the other members on what is happening at the audit committee and what are the issues of concern. And do they allow that discussion to happen? Do they take some of the issues that are raised seriously enough? And after that, do they act on it? So that signaling effect is extremely important, and that comes when there is trust between audit committee independent members. There is trust between the management and the audit committee members. So I think the overall culture of trust becomes extremely critical in all of this. On the other point, the next point that I wanted to talk about is, in this maturity model, how, as audit committee members, when we chair these meetings, we have some frustrations as to why some basics don't happen immediately and why does it take time. And therefore, understanding where the organization is in terms of its maturity, and how are you measuring that quarter on quarter, even though you're not reached the most desired state, I won't say end state because it's always evolving, but you're reaching the desired state, but are you getting closer to it, or you're not making movement, or your movement is extremely slow? These are the issues to seriously consider. Sometimes we find that organizations which are in very, very high growth path find it extremely constraining when audit committee raises issues on risk and risk management and put certain controls. It's like looking at insurance premium. When things are fine, you don't need you feel the premium is a waste. But the day some crisis strikes, you realize how important it is. So especially in very, very high growth companies, my personal experience has been that it's been a journey to work with the entrepreneur or work with the other members to ensure that while the company is growing, the audit committee is not going to put gears to slow down the progress of the company, but work in step, in hand, in a manner in which the company can progress without creating undue risk, but still grow at the pace at which it wants to grow. So keeping pace with the growth of the company and having the risk frameworks in place appropriate to the size of the company and the growth trajectory that it has for itself and its own situation, whether it is getting ready for IPO, etc., becomes very, very critical. The third point I wanted to talk about was the role of the audit committee in companies that have complex structures, which could be complex structures because of tax reasons. In some companies which are infrastructure or real estate led, it is very much required that you have multiple companies because it works on an SPV structure. You have multiple funders for different projects. So by merely having number of companies is not a problem, but how does the audit committee create oversight over all these companies is what is very, very critical. Because as companies become more complex and the number of projects increase, or the number of geographies in which they are present increase, the role of the audit committee becomes much more critical. Geography and the regulatory requirements of those countries also becomes equally critical and an essential part of what the audit committee must engage on. So when we talk of crowded agenda, this indeed puts a huge amount of pressure because apart from all the points that have been discussed in the past, you also need to look at regulatory environments in other geographical locations. How do you satisfy yourself that all those geographical locations compliances are met properly and there is no hidden risk anywhere? So I think these are some of the challenges. The way we have tried to do it is to have, again, as was mentioned by other speakers, 4 meetings, audit committee meetings in a year in large complex companies is absolutely not sufficient. You need to have multiple meetings in between and have structured on different topics and different themes. Sometimes you need to step back and say, okay, we started creating all these companies because of a certain need. Now we step back and reevaluate whether all of them are required or some of them can be collapsed. So some of these kinds of discussions have to be scheduled very diligently to ensure that we are keeping our operations as simple as is possible to deliver the best possible outcome, and yet not compromise on the governance requirements that are there. What we also do is have some detailed reviews on some of the subsidiaries by rotation, depending on the kind of risk it could potentially create for the parent company. Also have geographical leaders present some of the key geographies so that we look at the risks of those geographies. So we do these by rotation, not possible in the normal 4 audit committee meetings that you have, but in separate meetings to have discussions, to make sure that we have the necessary comfort. And of course, work with the internal auditors and the statutory auditors very, very carefully to ensure that we have their inputs and we are constantly listening. Sometimes auditors will say certain things at board meetings where you have to read between the lines and immediately understand that they are actually highlighting a kind of it's not yet a red flag, but it could be a red flag. So that kind of early intervention, you need to pick up those signals and have those one-on-one conversations with the auditors and the internal auditors to ensure that you're on top of the situation. And these are normal things. When companies are growing very fast, there may be things that need to, all the systems and processes are not keeping pace and not completely in sync. And that's a constant evolution. And without getting panicky about it, working hand in hand with the auditor, the internal auditor, and the management to ensure that we are moving forward in line with the goals of the company, but not compromising on any risk management measures. The fourth point, which I want to talk about, is driving the tech and digital agenda and the role that audit committees have in ensuring that we improve the quality and reliability of financial statements, reporting and disclosure. How do we use technology to do this? How do you push for digital adoption? This becomes extremely critical in companies that are large and complex, companies that have large number of transactions, very transaction-oriented companies, where digital interventions could be very, very significant in improving the operating efficiencies. You can have automated reconciliations, you can have automated sign-ons. There are many, many things that can be done. The use of robotics in ensuring that a lot of transactions are really automated so that human intervention is brought down to the minimum. So pushing the management to report on their digital transformation agenda, that will make the audit committees much more efficient, and it will make the role of the finance team extremely efficient. Now, what we have found, the point that was discussed earlier, is the leadership of the finance team, the composition of the finance team, the organization structure that takes care of all of these, whether there are people responsible for revenue recognition, which is very critical in some of the services companies, whether they have people looking at potential risks with the new labor codes which have been put in place. So some of these things are very, very critical and emerging. And the audit committee's role is to be on top of all of this and drive that agenda to ensure that we are not viewed as somebody who is hampering the progress of the company or putting a dampener on the enthusiasm of the entrepreneur, but only ensuring that their reputational risk, the market value, the stakeholder perception, transparency, all of that is enhanced in dispensing with our roles. So with that, I think I will stop and I will be there for other questions. And over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Revati. If I can let out a secret which I heard about Revati, is that she heads or is part of the audit committee in many companies. And the management of these companies are terrified of her because she asks very incisive questions. And this is what I heard, honestly. Okay, you brought out a lot of very interesting points, especially that on technology and digital. There are some questions which are coming about, looking how do you trust the revenue which is coming in, which has been slated there. And other thing which I'll come to when the question answer session starts. Then the other interesting thing was that audit is a journey. It keeps on evolving, yes. And the board chairman has a very important role when the audit committee chairman reports the proceedings to the board. How much time is given, what is the discussion that takes place, or is it just that you listen to what the audit committee chairman has to say and say, let's move on to the next item. Thank you very much, Revati. Moving on, the next speaker is Mr. Partha Bhattacharya. It is Parthasarathi Bhattacharya. I think most of you would know him because he was the chairman of Coal India from 2006 to 2011. This was around the same time when I was the chairman of Hindustan Petroleum. And he is a very strong leader. And if you're associated with the public sector, you will appreciate this. Partha steered CIL, that is Coal India Limited, from a mini Ratna in 2007 to a Navaratna in 2008, and finally as a Maharatna company in 2011. This is an absolutely unique feat in the career of any PSU CND. Normally, these kind of transitions happen. It will take 2-3 chairmen to happen and a period of 5 to 10 years to happen. And here you have somebody doing it in a period of just 5 years. In 2010, Mr. Bhattacharya spearheaded the initial public offer of 10% of CIL's equity, which became a landmark event in the country. The IPO was one of the top 3 in the world in that year, and I understand it is still the largest in India. Mr. Parthasarathi Bhattacharya retired in 2011, and since then he has been in many other companies in various roles, including as a managing director of Haldia Petrochemicals, of which he is still the director. And better part is that he has written a very interesting book, which I really loved reading. It's called When Coal Turned Gold. When Coal Turned Gold. It has been published by Penguin in August 2018. I was so impressed by the book. Actually, I wrote an unsolicited review of the book in LinkedIn. If you have the time, please do read the book. Partha, all yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arun, for that very generous introduction. And now you will appreciate the reason why I chose, or rather volunteered, to be the last speaker, because everything I believe has now been said, and I will have very little to say at this point in time. Absolutely right. The role and challenges of audit committee has been evolving. It's a very dynamic kind of a process. What we knew about the audit committee's role 5 years back is very different from what it is today. And as our international speaker, Madam Johnson, mentioned when she was covering all the different aspects, she talked about climate change. And I'm quite sure that considering that more than 1,000 corporations have already sort of pledged to become net zero emission companies by 2050, and 120 countries have joined them. So someday or the other, that will also become a part of the thing that audit committee will have to possibly regulate whether we are moving in that direction or not. If one of the companies where we are working as audit committee chairman or audit committee member also volunteers similarly to become a net zero emission company, so that is going to be the range. 5 years back or a few years back, we had the role was broadly defined as statutory compliance, financial results, review of the audit process, and things like that. It has already moved into cybersecurity, digital transformation, and things like that. So the scope is widening. I will naturally, like every other speaker, I will try to concentrate on only one of the few issues, and I'll not be able to avoid overlap because a lot of issues have been covered, but maybe my coverage could be slightly different. So the first issue I take up is how the audit committee can make corporate governance enforcement better. Now, till a few years back, if you stepped out of the Calcutta airport, you would have found a sort of a board that had one nice sentence written, and the sentence is attributed to Albert Einstein. The sentence is that it is not important to know everything or everyone, but it is important to know who knows. So, as a minority shareholder or an investor, I mean, all of us are minority shareholders in some companies or the other. When we invest some money, what do we actually do? We take out money from our banks, where we consider it very safe, but I mean, low returns. From that, we take and put it into some company, where in expectation of better returns, but naturally with a little bit of more risk. Now that, when we do that, the company is like a black box. We really don't know much about the company, but still we do it. What is our assurance? Our assurance is the quality of people who are managing the board and specifically the audit committee. I think that is the best assurance or the best bet based on which we invest. So it's all about governance. Corporate governance is an assurance to the investors that the company will manage its finances properly and will keep itself away from all kinds of improper dealings, improper financial transactions, and things like that. Now, what it basically means, the independent directors have to be really independent. I think it has all been touched upon by various speakers before. But that aspect of independence is very, very key and very, very important. Independence would be that basically, to my mind, it is the remuneration that one gets from the particular company where he is the independent director or audit committee member. That should be basically limited to whatever is a sitting fee or maybe some commission on profits and nothing beyond that. Quite often, because of the expertise that the independent directors come with, there is a sort of a tendency for the management to try and use the expertise, and on which there could be a proposition of paying something for that. I think these are things that should be definitely avoided. I mean, an independent director can advise the company informally on some aspects of business, but for that, it is better to avoid any payment on that account. And it is actually, if you accept a payment, then that has to be, I think, reported somewhere. So that is what will preserve the independence. The other independence is intellectual independence. I mean, we should, and as an audit committee chairman, you should be completely free to feel that you can question the business heads, the statutory audit, the CFO, the CEO, and any member of the top management team of the company. Just pick up the phone and talk to them about how the business is being run. I mean, that freedom you should feel. That's an internal thing. I mean, you should feel it within yourself. So once you feel that, you can possibly discharge the role of the audit committee member or a chairman much more effectively. Now, coming to the other aspects, see, one of the most important things is, I'll also talk about the engagement of the audit committee with the statutory auditors and internal auditors. That's also, I mean, I know this has been spoken by my previous speaker, but I'll also touch upon this aspect. See, basically on issues of internal audit, in most of the large companies today, the internal audit is outsourced. It's outsourced to good external firms. Now, when it is outsourced to good external firms, the process of selection is something which is very important. We have to see that the proper process is followed, the remunerations are fair and reasonable, and the entire audit function is properly allocated. And sometimes there are multiple companies chosen, so it should be properly allocated, and depending upon the competence that each of them brings in. More important than that is the chief of internal audit. Quite often it happens that the chief of internal audit is is chosen from one of the senior finance people. And for a management, let us say somebody who is very strong in treasury or accounts and all that, to take him out of that position and put him in internal audit, most companies will feel, or at least some companies will feel, that it is something which can be avoided. I mean, internal audit would be normally earmarked for somebody not at the best top quality among the F&A team. But that should be avoided. That should be avoided in the sense that person who has a general interest and taste in internal audit, who can function as an internal auditor, he should be chosen, irrespective of what it means for the company's financial and accounts functioning. I mean, that the audit committee should prevail upon the management to do that, to make that happen. And normally, if an audit committee is there for a couple of years or 2-3 years, they know who are the good guys in the finance and accounts team. So I think one of the best should be picked up for that particular role. Then the question is the internal audit agencies. If they are external, then you have a lot of comfort in the sense that they cannot be, and they have a reporting relationship with the audit committee. You are fairly secure that the management will not be able to bounce on them. I mean, create any dislocation of their job or create any problem with them, will not interfere. And so to that extent, non-interference is assured. Here, when they do internal audit of various departments, I think I have seen this very effective in 1 or 2 companies. It is better to have an internal audit rating done. Now, once internal audit rating is done, I mean, it could be very good, it could be satisfactory, it could be scope of improvement is there, whatever it is. Then it creates, in the space of internal audit, among the departments, there is a competition created. So when it is reviewed, the audit committee chairman can expect that any particular department which is rated a little lower, they should try to improve the rating in the next review. And that should become a KRA of that particular departmental head and the whole department. So in this process, a better compliance with internal audit, because what normally happens is that you often see that internal audit report coming to the audit committee, some of the important aspects, they come to the audit committee. And you find that the question and the answer given by the management don't correspond to each other. So that is something where the management team has actually failed in answering the audit query properly. And the auditors have also not been able to get the right answers. So here, if we press, or rather if we make the point that this kind of things is not acceptable, you have to convince the auditor. If you're trying to convince the audit committee, why not convince the auditor? And as sort of a convergence should be ensured between the question and the answer. And that should actually make the audit response better. I mean, that should be actually used to mark, to provide a rating for the audit response of each department. If that kind of a process can be instituted, we have seen that becoming quite effective in improving the audit response of various departments. And the results are always good for the company. Things like, let us say, procurement, sales, inventory holding, all these things, if there are deep dive is given by proper internal audit, I mean, there will always be loopholes coming up. There are always loopholes will come up. In large corporations, it's very frequent that in spite of the item being in inventory, again, purchase orders are being issued in large quantities, quite a big amount of money being held up in working capital. Things like that keep on happening. And so that gives an audit committee to, whenever that comes to sight, an opportunity to try and improve the functioning. I mean, you should not allow that to happen. Once is all right, but next time you should not recur. I mean, just by enforcing that these things don't recur, you can do a lot. The procurement policy can be reviewed and can be definitely improved by a properly functioning audit committee, in the sense that right from the raising of indents and then diversity of the sources, diversifying the sources. If there is only one source, you have to ensure that by the next tender, you must have at least multiple sources. So source diversification. then to create competition, price competition, and ultimately come to something like a reverse auction, where you get the best possible prices. All these processes, normally you will find in companies, the companies are somewhere in between as far as the procurement cycle is concerned. And the audit committee can really move the whole process towards towards a logical conclusion in terms of efficiency and competitiveness to discover the prices properly. Similarly, in case of sales, price fixation, are we price takers or are we price setters? And if you are not price setters today, how do we get into price setting situation tomorrow? Actually, some of these are matters that should be dealt by the board. But again, I mean, board will expect the audit committee to go into more details on these issues. Another issue that the audit committee basically has to face is the utilization of funds in various funds raised in different funds raised, whether they are utilized in the same pattern or not, the loans and borrowings and investments. In the loans and borrowings, I have, at least in my experience, I've seen that there's always a scope for certain improvement in the approach that the finance and accounts department or the CFO takes in the negotiations. For example, you may find a company being rated at a particular level, maybe a little lower on the investment grade, A or A plus or something like that. But the company has done very well in the recent past. So there has to be a pressure on the CFO that with these results, you must approach for a rating upgrade. And once the rating is upgraded, that should get reflected in the price of cost of funds, cost of borrowings. See, these are a very practical way in which the audit committee can try and improve the results of the company, and try and have the CFO take a more proactive role in such matters. Usually, CFO is a highly busy person, and so when he talks to the banks and banks offer a certain rate, quite often there is no negotiation or there is no reaction to that. Sometimes in the board, while approving, we have to say that, well, try once again. That this is higher than the benchmark rate at which you should be getting money, because this is what your rating is. You have done well. So this is one process that I think the CFO can always move forward and do that. The related party transactions, these are very important, definitely, and this has been very exhaustively dealt. But one more area where I find that the audit committee should ponder about is whether the company has proper delegation of authority. Because very often, the delegation of authority, or rather the delegation of authority, is not properly executed. I mean, people are acting beyond their delegation. Sometimes we find that very important documents or very important decisions are taken, is empowered to a committee where any two is mentioned. Now that any two, we'll have a list of 20 people, right from the CEO and down to assistant manager. Now there, sometimes you need to step in and say, well, it can be done by the board or maybe done by the audit committee. If it goes through audit committee, it can be done with the audit committee as well. That you should have at least one of them should be in the top 3 or top 4 persons, either the CEO, CFO, or the chief of internal audit, or the company secretary. This should be one of the secretaries out of those 2. These kind of stipulations you can always keep on doing so that the control becomes more effective and more appropriate and commensurate to the size and scale of the operations. So the delegation of authority and its proper implementation is absolutely a very important thing. There are instances where the finance division, particularly in areas of taking forex covers, for example. If I'm exceeding my time limit, I hope. Yeah, in case of forex cover, there are some companies that follow different kind of rules. There's different kind of philosophy. I think there is a case where certain amount of straightening can happen there. Some companies take forex cover 6 months, 8 months. If there's an exposure, cover has to be taken on that principle. Some companies believe in keeping it open and let us see, as it comes, we'll see. Some companies do more proactive kind of a thing. They take a cover based on inputs from proper consultants, or high caliber consultants, and view on the currencies and things like that. They don't They don't just do it blindly. So here there is a case where if you find a situation where these forex transactions are being done routinely, just as a wherever there is an exposure, even in spite of the fact that in certain windows rupee is likely to strengthen, and that is a view, but still you are taking a forex cover. The audit committee has a role to play that well. This is not the way to be done. I mean, you have to really use inputs from experts and then design your cover policy, forex transaction policies. So these are some of the issues. I think more or less that is all that I had to say, and I will stay on for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Partha. That was very interesting. A lot of operational and actionable points that you have raised, which are very important as not only for audit committee, but also for the CFO of the company as well. And I think in a way they are interrelated as well. The one issue raised about the internal auditor, or rather the external internal audit, is also very interesting. There's always a question of who's finally responsible for the internal audit. Is it the external internal auditor, or do you appoint a general manager level officer within the organization? So these are key issues. I'm glad you've raised all these things, and especially about you have indirectly alluded to the fraud that happens in procurement as well as inventory management and things like that. These are actually day-to-day problems anybody would face in any audit committee for that matter. And thank you for pointing them out. Thank you very much. Right. So now we'll have to move on to the last part of the program, which is the Q&A session. Okay, I will first read out the kind of rules to be followed for the Q&A. Okay, we have budgeted about 30 to 45 minutes for the Q&A. It can be less or more depending on the queries that are raised. And once again, I request people who have questions to use the chat box for this purpose, and kindly keep the questions very short and crisp. Okay, you can also name the speaker from whom you need the answer, or if it's a general question, I shall be directing them to the speaker's concerned. Okay, and well and good, let's start on that, but I will request Rajiv, who may have compiled the questions, Mr. Rajiv Kapoor, Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor, who's been compiling these questions. But before he gets on with the questions, let me take the liberty of asking a few questions based on the discussions that we have had. The other day, I was reading a very interesting article which talked about the two GE chairmen, Jack Welch and Jeff Immelt, and how things changed from one leader to the other. And one of the comments were made by the writer of that report was that fudging numbers at the iconic GE was commonplace, even under Jack Welch. So I just want to ask Mr. Ranganath, as well as Rachel, how common is it in India and in UK for that matter, this fudging of numbers?
Rachel has already left, sir.
Okay, fine then. That's fine. Mr. Ranganath is there?
I think so. He should be there. Mr. Ranganath, are you there, please?
Okay, then anybody else can answer this?
No, he's there, sir. He's very much
okay. Yeah, right.
But his mic is switched.
It's on mute, is it?
Yeah, it's on mute, basically. Mr. Ranganath, can you hear us? Mr. Ranganath? Must be logged in and still.
Okay, Vijay,
Rachel is there. Rachel is there. She's just
I'm just informed I need to jump on a call shortly, but I could try to address the question. I mean, there's lots of articles that show that the fudging still happens everywhere in the world, and of course, the UK is not immune from that. And there's a lot of recent cases, of course, in Europe. We have Wirecard as well. So to answer that, yes, it is something that happens at the best of the companies, and I think that it is becoming a bigger topic regulatory wise. And I think, it'll be really interesting this year, as we've all been discussing with the new regulations, new standards, and this rapidly changing environment, how external audit plays in that, and where the Big Four will play in that as well. So as these cases unfold, we hope that there'll be change. And I think this kind of behavior is something that we'll always be battling and always have to have eyes out of every side of our head in terms of detecting. So I hope that is helpful. But I must thank you all very much. I have to go, but I really enjoyed hearing everyone's insights. And if you would like to get in touch, I'm on LinkedIn. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. Bye. Mr. Raghunath, are you back? Okay, then let me request Revati to take this call.
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I think
you don't have to name the companies.
No, I think it's a tough one. As they say, best laid plans of mice and men. As long as there is greed, and as long as people are looking, chasing power, some of these things are inevitable. But therefore, that is why a very vigilant audit committee is very, very much required. I know you said that people are afraid of me. I hope they are not, because I hope they realize that we are doing it only to protect their reputation and their market value of the company. And as long as entrepreneurs realize that or managing directors or company management realizes that we are asking these tough questions only to ensure that we are trying to protect reputational risk, and we are trying to protect many things that could go wrong. We would have seen other things happening in our own journey in the corporate career. So we just don't want that to happen. So I think the important thing coming back to, it is back to basics. Finally, you need to have a good assessment of the framework. You need to have great trust in the management. There should be independence in spirit. I just have to underline again, all these points were mentioned earlier. Independence in spirit amongst even board members. Are they, quite often we hear, I'm independent because the law says only so much, above so much is to be disclosed, below this is not to be disclosed. But for you, it may still be material, right? That whatever financial interest or monetary interest may still be important to you and it might compromise you as an independent director. So how do we keep those kinds of things completely at bay is extremely critical. Therefore, constant conversations with the management and degree of comfort that they're trying to do the right things. There may be mistakes along the way. Those may be genuine mistakes in the process of growth. But if it is deliberate, then I think I would really seriously worry. And those are the kinds of difficult conversations that you have to be able to initiate very fearlessly with the CFO, with the internal audit chief, the external auditor, statutory auditor, or internal auditor, and other board members. These conversations are not easy. These are complex, they are nuanced, they require a lot of finesse in the way we ask those questions. And again, as I said, it's a journey. It's not a snapshot in time. It's a journey over a period of time.
Thank you, Revati. Manoj, what is your experience in this? Do you think there are much more misstatements? That is a commonplace kind of thing, which the statement was made about GE. Is that true in India as well, in your experience as an auditor? You're on mute, please.
Sorry, sir. Actually, I would tend to believe, as Revati also alluded, right, wherever there is, human being and there is an element of greed, things is likely to happen anywhere. It doesn't matter India or anywhere. The situations could differ. Sometimes, it could be an extreme end we have seen in the past, right? Things like Satyam happening in India, etc. Right? That's an extreme end. I don't see it's as rampant as it would look like some of these cases. But sometimes the misstatements are also happen because our experiences and misinterpretation of the accounting literature, and sometimes something can be capitalized versus revenue. Those kind of, so that we have to differentiate between a fraud versus a misinterpretation, and the way the accounting thing, etc., is becoming complex. We are seeing much more happening, and with the Ind AS environment now, the restatement will be a much more common theme, right? Previously in Indian GAAP, there was no restatements happening, so it is likely that we may see these things happening a lot as well.
Okay, thank you.
Arun, can I just make a point here?
Sure, please, sure.
Yeah. See, this is a very interesting kind of a thing, because you spoke about fudging and frauds. In a very well-managed company, otherwise extremely well-managed, CFO very sincere, audit very effective, in that kind of a company, what happened was, this was a fraud relating to Mediclaim policy. There was a Mediclaim for all employees. And the gentleman who was managing insurance, he was just a one-man show. I mean, he was a general manager, one-man show. He never bothered to let anybody enter his domain. And he has been doing it for 20 years. That is where the problem is. So when you don't allow anybody to enter into the domain. And what happened was that very distant relatives and completely not employees of the company were availing this benefit in a circuitous manner, and the money was being sent to all kinds of places. So this got discovered. Ultimately, he had to be put to jail straight away. Yeah, there was nothing else that could be done. He has been sentenced, the job lost, and all that. But I was quite amazed that in a well-managed, well-governed company, something like this can happen. And the only reason I attribute it to is that the person was allowed, in some historical legacy manner, the person was allowed to be on his own. I mean, no supervision.
No, but in a company like GE, to say that was commonplace kind of shocked me when I read it. Anyway, let's moving on. Jyoti, do you have any comments on this?
I have a couple of comments, Arun. One is that I think so long as we have excessive performance-based remuneration concept, I think this is going to be one of the risks which possibly GE had in a very big way when all this used to happen. To an extent, I think as far as banking companies are concerned, RBI has come out with some very good guidelines in terms of retaining bonuses and increments to some extent, and the component of variable come fixed pay. The couple of other comments I have is that we are in the age where we have many companies which are chasing high valuations, and therefore the risk has become much higher in companies which could be vulnerable because of that. I think as board members, we need to be alert on this. One is that I think the engagement which Revati mentioned with CFO, with management team, with internal auditors, outside the boardroom, you're sure to get some clues or some hints which you can pick up. The second is diversity in the board. We have discussed so much about. So if you have people from the industry who represent on the board, I think they would be able to catch something, when something seems to be going wrong. Because as chartered accountants, we are all taught overall checks where we do ratio analysis and compare with industry. But that's only numbers. I think even if in a market, for example, where the industry guys are suffering and a company seems to be doing unreasonably well, then I think someone can understand why it is, seek explanation, and somewhere you may be able to catch that something is going wrong. I read one thing very interesting these days, this morning, and that was about revenue-based borrowings. Yeah. So I guess that if revenue-based borrowings become a way for particularly the new generation companies, I think the desire to overstate figures would automatically come down.
Very true. Very true. Thanks. Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor, are you ready with the questions, or shall I?
No, I'm ready with the questions. There have been only two questions, and both are from Mr. Rajiv Pandya. The first question he has asked is, should Risk Management Committee be a subject of Audit Committee, or should it report directly to the board? And this was meant for Mr. Ranganath, because immediately, moment he started, he had posted, but he has not named it.
Okay.
So now I would request anybody can answer, since he is not there until Mr. Ranganath has joined. Or shall we move to the next question, sir, at the moment?
Okay. Yeah, move it to the next question, then we'll take a call.
Because Rachel has also answered on that.
Yeah, Rachel.
Second question is, because you have seen it, and should audit committees focus primarily on accounting audits or equally on operational safety, social and environmental audits? This was basically meant for Mr. Manoj Kumar Vijay, because during his presentation, this question had come in, I guess.
So let me attempt to answer it, and maybe I'll lean upon the other colleagues I have on the forum. Basically, primarily as a responsibility in a role, financial statement audit clearly is primary responsibility of the audit committee. But what we are seeing more or less more and more now with the emerging things like this environmental audit or social audit, these things coming up, they generally actually, if there is no specific committees, etc., for these things fall under the lap of audit committees. If there are specific committees which are looking at environment matters or anything like that, then I think that those specific committees normally would address that kind of a need. But I'm happy to take any other inputs from my colleagues if they have seen anything in their practical experience. Jyotin, or
Jyotin, please.
I think this again has been one of my favorite topics. So I thought I should give my thoughts on this. One is that I think wherever there is a risk management committee which is mandated, I think companies do have it. Very often you find common members across audit committee and risk management committee. But I think it is important for the two to collaborate, and particularly when guiding the scope of internal audit and guiding the scope of the emphasis for the statutory auditors, getting this joint view is very important, obviously, and therefore whilst the committees could be separate, they could have different members. I think having a collaboration is very important.
Right. Rajiv, anything more from?
No, sir. No.
Okay, then let me ask one question which is in the back of my mind. See, I think this morning newspaper, I read that one of the pharmaceutical companies in the country has been siphoning off money to their privately owned companies as a related party transaction without actually revealing that they were their promoters' owned companies. How do we tackle these kind of things? Yeah, you can start, Jyotin.
Manoj, do you want to go at it, or you want me to hear?
No problem. I can try and make an attempt. Then you can add, Jyotin, if you want. Prefer. This area, actually, I would put it what you touched upon, Mr. Balakrishnan, the related party, is one of the most actually vulnerable areas for anything going wrong based on our own assessment, because we do various audits. And this goes back to the point about, I think, I earlier touched upon, then I think Revati also mentioned independence and all these conflicts of interest, etc. One is what is strictly by law and what is in spirit action. Sometimes people have found various ways where just they've used the definition of related parties, or they have managed to be out of the definition of related party for disclosure purposes, and been able to then, maybe those transactions will never come to the audit committees or in a fashion that they should be. So that is where, the problem comes in, where it's a thin line, and, you would enter into transactions, you'll do things with compromising on the pricing or any other ways that one can do. So my experience is this is one area very vulnerable actually for anything going wrong, related party transactions. Jyotin, you want to add something you're saying?
No, I think I would fully agree with what Manoj said. But, what I was discussing when I took my opening remarks, that I think the audit committee also needs to get a little more involved in this approval process. And it's not just a compliance matter. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think we have to make sure that how parties are identified with are there, system related controls which are there to make sure that transactions don't get missed. And then, of course, if something like what has possibly appeared in the press today were to happen, it would not be for small amounts. I think it would be for something which would be significant. And I'm sure it has to get picked up when we are doing the scrutiny, at least at the annual accounts time, if not earlier. So that's what I would say. But that independent check, getting more understanding in terms of how the process operates rather than looking at the individual transactions. I think that's what the audit committee should focus on.
In fact, this is exactly one of the points I was discussing with one of the auditors. And he was talking about, in many well-managed companies, you still see, or supposedly well-managed companies, or at least run by, audited by good firms, how do some of these things get missed? And there is this new emerging concept of related party versus connected parties or connected organizations. So there is a slight difference. There is a connection, but how do you establish that connection? And that's a very, very complex process because we are not detectives. After all, we are spending X number of hours. We rely on internal auditors. We rely on external auditors. We put a framework down. But if the disclosures are false, or if the disclosures are deliberately kept at arm's length, that all the boxes are ticked, it becomes really a matter of then culture and trust. So it's a broad brush answer, but that seems to be the case. The connected companies is the biggest issue people are facing today.
And some of the tricks which have been employed by foreign companies investing in India, especially in joint venture companies, because they have a restriction on the dividend that could be taken out. I'm talking about a story which is about 8 to 9 years old. Okay, so the trick used was that the technology fee, there was unfortunately no restriction on the technology fee. So the technology fee became a major part of the repatriation of funds until it took a while to get it noticed. Okay, and what was the technology fee was subject to really, as per the contract, as per the agreement, that the foreign company would bring in new technology and upgrade the quality of the product at XYZ, etc., improve productivity, etc. But these were running companies. The JV company was actually a running company, which has been 50% share has been bought over by the foreign company. No new technology has come because the product is such that there's a limit to what new technology you can bring. The productivity has not changed, but large amount of money started going out as technology fee under the Govt of it was part of a related party transaction at one level, but at the next level they said this is not an RPT, this is a technology fee that is taking place. Okay, so let me move on to one last.
Can I just make a point here?
Yes, yes.
I think one way, there is no really answer to this. I'm not trying to give any answer or any other additional thing, but just as a comfort to the audit committee, we can in some cases have a high quality auditor appointed only for RPTs. And he has to particularly check the arm's length and market pricing part, and give his comment on every transaction that has happened, and let the management pay some hefty fees for that. If there is an incidence of RPTs in any particular organization in large numbers. Like, for example, the example that you cited, I think if there was a strong auditor who was breathing down the neck on the RPT transactions, as long as it falls under RPT, as technology fee, they can't take away that much of money because it will not qualify under the market pricing and arm's length this thing, So this may be one of the ways by which audit committee can get comfort. It's not that.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. In fact, in every audit committee which I sit on, I insist that there be a third party look into the RPT transactions.
Exactly. I am also doing the same thing.
Jyotin agrees with me that I see.
Because how does audit committee satisfy the arm's length part?
Correct.
Yeah, very difficult. You have to buy insurance by having a third party They don't party look at it. Yes.
Exactly.
Jotin, any comment?
I think I had mentioned that even when I spoke in the beginning, that I think you need to have an independent.
Right.
And especially when you have transactions that are one-time transactions also, there are a lot of one-time transactions that happen. And that is where some huge money transfers could happen. You have to be extremely diligent, because if you are not diligent, we spend a lot of time on the routine transactions, make sure arm's length pricing has been established. But these one-time transactions, very difficult to establish arm's length pricing. And therefore, as audit committee, we go into fair amount of detail on a lot of these one-time transactions where there could be some hidden stuff that could be brought up. So we go into fair amount of detail on that.
Okay, let me bring in one last point before we close today. It is about the effectiveness of the whistleblower policy in combating fraud. Haven't whistleblowers been the biggest contributors in detecting fraud? Is the law adequate to protect them? This is the hypothesis I'm placing before you. Anybody on that?
So could you repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, one second there. I'll repeat the entire question. Haven't whistleblowers been the biggest contributors in detecting fraud? Is the law adequate to protect them? That is the question.
Again, I don't know, maybe I can trigger that discussion. So at least maybe Jotin, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Manoj. I think you were saying something. Okay, so I think it is true that at least in the recent instances which have come to light, I think whistleblowers have played a key role in making sure that these things get come to public domain, and then action is taken. But when it comes to protection, though theoretically there are instances where it is said, and particularly in every whistleblower code, we have a clause which says that the person who is whistleblower will be protected. I find in practice, I think a lot needs to be done. And more than anything else, it is the risk from within, if I may put it that way. Now, if you happen to be a whistleblower from within the organization, I have seen instances where the whistleblower does go through a lot of, I wouldn't call it direct action, but a sort of a stigma which gets attached to that person. So personally, I feel that while there is, it's embedded in the code, I think the law possibly is not aggressively active on protecting the whistleblower. That's my view.
Right. Anybody else wants to make a comment?
Yeah, I will just make one comment. You see, this policy, whatever is the protection available to whistleblowers, there has been quite a few instances where this has been misused by the whistleblower. He has not blown any whistle, but under the garb of protection, he is trying to do all kinds of nonsense and then saying that I am a whistleblower. See, I remember as Chairman Coal India, there was a guy who was sort of transferred out or something like that. So he had a grudge, and he wanted to be transferred back into a good city, wherever his chosen place of transfer was. And since that was not given, he used to ask all kinds of questions about the top management, all kinds of questions. And that became a mess, an RTI and inquiry and all that. Ultimately, we had to face such people out. He's not contributing anything by blowing the whistle, but he's blowing something which is creating embarrassment and harassment to the top management.
Thank you. And with those words, I think we will close the formal session. And
there was a question, sir, by one Mr. Prabhakar Rao.
Okay.
He says, please enlighten us on the role of audit committee in enterprise risk management and regulatory compliance of the corporates. And he had marked it for, I think, Ms. Revati Ashok, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, Revati, last call.
Yes, I'm there. Role of the audit committee.
It's a very...
So I think that's a very all-encompassing question.
He specifically mentioned in the ERM and regulatory compliance of the corporates in these two specific terms.
Yeah. So basically, you have to, I'll try to, it's a very broad-based question, but I'll try to answer that. You have to always reinforce audit quality, whether it's internal audit or external audit. You have to reinforce the quality of audit. You need to have a strong finance team, which is very, very complementary, which has various skill sets which are required, including digital and financial accounting and various other kinds of skill sets. You need people who are very well versed within the audit team with the emerging regulations, which are very fast changing, so that people understand the impact of all these various regulatory changes that are coming and the disclosure requirements. I think basically keeping pace with the accounting developments. And then, of course, we have discussed related party and identifying all the compliance related to that, having strong functions. Overall, you need to have a very, very strong framework. You need to have, you need to ensure that there is good level of planning, and there is technology. It's a lot of it is technology based, and there is security risk which is constantly getting assessed, and we are keeping pace with the lot of changes that are taking place both in the regulatory environment as well as the digital environment. So I would say these are our roles. Overall, provide good governance and leadership on good governance.
Right. Rajiv, will you do the honors now?
Yeah, yes, sir. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of IOD fraternity, I have been honored and privileged to have got an opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special day. And I convey my sincere gratitude and thanks to all speakers, panelists, and our esteemed guests for being part of this webinar by taking out their precious time and enlightening us with their valuable thoughts, wisdom, and ideas. These sessions are important, wherein diversifying thoughts emerge, thereby bringing all of us together, especially people who are part of this larger intellectual ecosystem, which is vibrant, has original and practical ideas, thereby coming out with a solution. Coming with Mr. M.D. Kamath as a keynote speaker for today's event, he inspired all of us and showed us with the futuristic and emerging role of audit committee in dynamic environment, covering issues from financial statements to process effectiveness and CFO succession. Thank you very much. And I would also like to express my special gratitude to Ms. Rachel Johnson in absentia for her special address, who captivated us by giving valuable insights on various contemporary issues. And lastly, I would like to express my special gratitude to all our eminent panelists and moderator who influenced us with talk, discussion, deliberation, and ideas by sharing their valuable insight on various advanced issues. Thank you all. And now I would like to convey supported us, that is our principal partner, Mrs. Mahindra Finance, a non-banking finance company. During the last 3 decades, Mahindra Finance has acted as a catalyst in the growth journey to its customers by providing accessible and relevant financial solutions, ranging from investment to insurance, that is home, vehicle, and SME loans, thereby transforming lives of millions of people. Thank you very much for the positive response. Our 2 associate partners, that is GAIL Gas, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Maharatna GAIL India Limited, which was incorporated in May 2008 for the smooth implementation of city gas distribution projects in 14 geographical areas comprising 52 cities and towns across the nation. As we all know, GAIL Gas has been instrumental in supplying natural gas, the new age fuel, which is efficient, non-polluting, economical, and the cleanest among fossil fuels to household, industries, commercial units, and transport sector. For its relentless service, GAIL Gas has also been awarded as the established City Gas Distribution Company of the year 2020 by Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry, FIPI. Congratulations and thank you very much. Our last associate partner, that is Haldia Petrochemicals, popularly known as HPL, is one of the largest petrochemical company in India with a capacity of 700 kilotons per annum, which they achieved in the shortest span of time. This was established in the year 90s as a symbol of Indian resurgence and which was formed out of a joint venture between Government of West Bengal, the Chatterjee Group, the Tata Group, and the Indian Oil Corporation. It is embedded with state-of-art process technologies for various manufacturing plants with world-class safety and environment considerations. Thank you all. And lastly, this evening wouldn't have been complete had it not been for this wonderful and participative audience. Thank you very much. Finally, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Mr. Arun Balakrishnan for his strategic guidance and unstinted support. And as always, a special thanks to Mr. Rajan for his relentless support at all times. A word of appreciation to Team Bangalore, who stood together and contributed phenomenally. And special thanks to our technical support team at Delhi, headed by Ravi and Shubham, for their backhand support system. And obviously the senior hierarchy of headquarter IOD Delhi for their unstinted guidance, support, as always. Have a nice day, stay safe, Jai Hind.